Hey guys, so in this video, I want to talk to you guys about how I structure my projects, my games in some project management software. For me, particularly, I use ClickUp, although I've used a lot of other stuff in the past. I've used Trello, I've used Jira, I've used, a combination of Jira and Confluence. ClickUp, I really love because it's super flexible, but bottom line, this is all going to be about how do you actually structure and provide some scaffolding around deliverables for your projects, right? I know this is kind of the boring, like, why do you got to learn this stuff? Let's jump in and program or like start creating some really pretty visuals and things like that, which all that is great. I'm not trying to talk crap. I'm just trying to say that this is specifically something that I'm really passionate about that I feel like is not talked about hardly ever, which I really feel like I want to provide some insight as to how I do it. I'm not necessarily saying I do it amazing, but hopefully I have something to offer, and I'd love to learn from you guys too. So bottom line, I use a program called ClickUp, and I work within the Agile methodology. So actually, I use the Agile methodology for only me, and then sometimes when I work with freelancers, I pull them into to that piece of software. But I know that's kind of odd, right? A lot of people are like, why do you use Agile if it's only you? You could just keep working on things. The reason why is because, as you could probably tell from these videos, I'm a pretty high energy type of person, and I feel like for me, I can easily get distracted when it comes to certain things, and I've just learned sort of how to shore up those weaknesses of mine, which is that I can easily get distracted if I don't have some sort of scaffolding. So that's the reason I do it, is because every 2 weeks, I essentially plan on what I'm going to deliver to myself and to my players, and then it provides me a really nice like sort of checkpoint to say, what did I do well? What didn't I do? What should I continue doing? And also a checkpoint to like reevaluate and readjust if something goes wrong, right? A lot of the times when we don't have those checkpoints, we don't really have any point to reflect, and so we just continue doing what is on our mind, and sometimes that's not really a good idea. So anyways, let me jump into the software. This is just sort of the introduction. I know it's gone on for 2 minutes, and I'm sorry about that. I'm new to this, so forgive me. Cool. All right, guys, so what we're looking at here is a program called ClickUp. Specifically, we're looking at my game Command Center Earth within ClickUp, the way I structure it around the Agile methodology within that program called ClickUp, or that project management software called ClickUp. I'm not going to go too much into why I use ClickUp, aside from the fact that I can tell you that it's really flexible and it provides really nice capabilities when you start bringing in other work other than programming. When you start pulling in animators or artists or sound effects people, programs like Jira, they tend to fall short in that regard because they're very specifically designed for programmers. ClickUp is designed pretty much for a wide range of work. So that's why I like ClickUp. So what you're looking at here, as I said, is how I structure my project around that Agile methodology. So I have my backlog here. Right, so you can see I have you can see a little image just popped up there. But I have a backlog that I prioritize from the top rather is what I want to work on next, more than likely. And the bottom is kind of the stuff that I don't really necessarily need to work on ASAP. So every 2 weeks I go through this backlog and I try to reprioritize just by dragging up and down appropriately. And you'll see that I have sort of these 2 tags here. So groomed means that I've gone in and I specifically added details to these tasks so that when I reach the end of my sprint, right, that's sort of like when my 2-week timeline of what I committed to is up, then I reevaluate my backlog, and that's the end of a sprint, right? And then I start pulling in new work. So essentially, groomed is when I add those details so that they're ready to essentially be pulled into the next round of work. So for example, integrate the final tutorial flow in Command Center Earth. You can see I've tagged it as discovery, controls, onboarding. Hopefully you guys appreciate my little icons here, the little baby for onboarding, because they don't yet know controls, which is the controller, so on and so forth. Discovery is really like, hey, I don't really know how long this is going to take, so I tag it appropriately just so I can sort of assess how much it's going to be based on that tag sometimes. Groomed really means I've gone through and I've added what's called acceptance criteria, ACs. So I went through and I thought about, okay, what is the definition of done for this task? We always want to think about definition of done because it allows us to essentially assess how big is this piece of work, right? And if we start adding a million ACs, we know, hey, we're probably not going to be able to deliver this in our sprint timeline. So that's another thing. You always want to be able to chunk things out so that you can deliver it in the timeline that you've committed to. For me, it's 2 weeks. If I start adding a bunch of ACs and it looks like it's going to be over 2 weeks, then I have to break that out into two, they call them user stories. Yeah, it's just a task that needs to be done. So the ACs for this one, for example, are, given I have never played the game before, I will be presented with a tutorial. Given I'm presented with the tutorial, I will be presented with an option allowing me to skip it. Given I want to play the tutorial again, I have the option to do so. So for me, when I was thinking about a tutorial, I was thinking, okay, first off, like, what do I hate about tutorials? One of those things that I hate about tutorials is when you can't skip the damn thing. Jesus, that drives me nuts, because if you've already played the tutorial, you don't want to have to sit through 10 minutes of it, right? So for me, that's what this AC here is all about, right? It's like, hey, if I've already played it, I want to be able to skip it. So when I go to actually create this tutorial, I need to implement an option that allows skipping. And then I want to be able to replay the tutorial. So for example, I was trying to think about players that maybe, they went through the tutorial, but then they kind of forgot and they want to play it again. There should be a way for them to play it again. That's kind of what I'm saying there. And then here, given I've never played the game before, I'll be presented with a tutorial. That's just saying like, hey, I need to implement a tutorial. So that essentially means it's groomed, meaning that I have defined the acceptance criteria for this task. What will make this thing done, okay? And then we kind of went over the backlog, right? A backlog is just where we collect all of the things that we want to do in our game. So anytime somebody says like, hey, I really want this feature. For example, I just posted a video on Reddit of the trailer for my game, and somebody gave me a really cool piece of advice. They said, hey, why don't you add the ability to invert the controls? So I essentially just added this task, add the ability to invert the controls, and then I added the image of the person saying it just for context, because later on it helps me sort of evaluate. And the cool thing about ClickUp is you can add, they call them custom fields, but I added this player votes custom field. So whenever somebody asks for this again, I'll increase this by 1. And then when I'm reevaluating what I should work on next, I can look really quickly like, hey, like what's the highest amount of player votes? Let's say, oh, people really want this. Okay, I should prioritize working on it next. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but bear with me. This is my second video. So, and if it's not second video, I'm going to be a liar on this video, but it's an early one. So if this video sucks, I'm sorry guys, hopefully I'll get better. I'll try not to ramble as much. So yeah, backlog is essentially where we collect all the things that we want to do for our game. And then at the end of every sprint, we try to sort of move things up and down on our backlog to sort of say, the things at the top are the things that are most likely to be worked on next. And the things at the bottom are the things that are least, defined, and the things that are least likely to be worked on next. Also just, if we want to add something real quick that somebody tells us, it goes to the bottom. And then when we reevaluate, we can move up or down. Let me go over how my sprints look. So you can see here, these are all my sprints. So these are essentially my 2-week long increments of work I committed to and what was done. So we'll just pick a random one and we'll jump in and see what it is. So sprint 17. So this was version 1.2.0 of my game. I don't always have a deliverable at the end of a sprint, but whenever I do, I try to tag it appropriately. So I'm going to click on that and you'll see, luckily, all of this stuff is done, which means that I stuck to my 2-week long, what I committed to, and I finished all that stuff in time. So what I committed to at the beginning of the 2-week long sprint was I wanted to fix cloud build failing due to the iOS build given the Firebase requirement. So essentially my cloud build was my Unity cloud build was failing because of Firebase. I pointed that, this is something we haven't gone over, but before we pull something in so that we know how much work we can do in a 2-week long sprint, we kind of gauge it based on arbitrary points. So I said it was a 3. For me, that's sort of like a medium task. A 5 is high, a 1 is easy, but everybody's sprints are kind of different because it's arbitrary. But in my case, a 3 tends to be something medium. And you'll see that I commit to 10 points. So when I'm pulling things in, I essentially will sort of ask myself, how big do I think this is? And then I'll pull in each one and I'll try to get all the way up to 10. And then at the end of the sprint, if I feel like, wow, 10 was too much, then I'll say, okay, I'm going to do 7 points next time until I kind of get to the threshold that I think is just right for me for a 2-week long interval. So bottom line, this was a 3-pointer. And that was, like I said, make sure that the cloud build is succeeding. Okay, because of Firebase. Another 3 for me was add 2 more levels to the game. 1 should be locked, 1 should be unlocked. So one big priority for me in the beginning of releasing my game was that I didn't have enough levels, and I wanted to make sure that I always was trying to frequently come out with more levels so that people would have something to play, right? Makes sense. Yeah, so this one was add 2 more levels. 1 should be locked, 1 should be unlocked. The way that I monetize in Command Center Earth is you have to watch an ad to unlock the level, and then you can play it as much as you want. So that is what locked and unlocked means. Unlocked means it's free. Locked means it requires either the game to be purchased or an ad to be watched. So this one, make our save system more reliable by manually adding all save references instead of having them be manually computed in-game. That's supposed to be computed. I'm not entirely sure what this is. I'd have to look at the ACs, but I don't want to bore the crap out of you guys. Essentially, this had to do with the save system, but I won't go over all the craziness of these ACs, but you could see, I went in and I defined them. You guys could pause the video if you want and see what this is, but like I said, don't want to bore the crap out of you. Send PlayFab event along when users go to the game update CC. So this essentially, in my live ops, I use PlayFab. I'm able to send events when players do certain things. It's really hard to know what to prioritize if I don't have any data on what people are doing. So I have a game update CC, meaning that players have played 4 of my levels and then they see this screen. I didn't know what players were playing or how many levels they were playing. And so it was really hard for me to know, like, do I have enough levels out? Do I not? So now I essentially send like an anonymous event out saying when somebody opens up this screen after 4 levels, it just says like, hey, some random person opened up the game update CC after 4 levels. So now I at least know, okay, they played 4 levels. Maybe people are interested. It just gives me a little more data in order to prioritize my backlog easier. So here's a small one. You'll see I have a 0.5er, which was game should change landscape orientation when user flips phone. So when I first launched my game, you were only able to look at it in one landscape view. So when you turned it, I think it was left, it would be upside down. If you turned it right, it would be right side up, but it wouldn't change orientation. So whoopsie. So yeah, that one was pretty easy. Given I rotate the phone landscape left, the game should adjust to be right side up. Given I rotate the phone landscape right, the game should adjust to be right side up. So essentially it was just you rotate left, you rotate right, it should be right side up. So you'll see I also added some context with the screenshot of my friend that had flagged this for me. Thanks, Ryan. Bottom line, this sprint was, actually don't have it here, but I forget what 2-week long interval this was, but I committed to all this work within 2 weeks. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, I said I was going to have that all done. And I think in this case, I actually did get it all done. The coinciding thing that I do at the end of the sprint is, as I said, I like to reflect. So I'm going to go into my docs and I'm going to show you. So I go to my backlog, I should say in the beginning of a sprint, I go to the backlog, and then based on these sort of groom tasks, I look at this and then I try to evaluate, based on these ACs, how big is it going to be? For me, I already said it was a 5-pointer, and then I would pull it in, and then I'd say, hey, what was my threshold? Oh, 10 points. Okay, cool. So this is 5 points. I have 5 more. So then I'd go to the next one. Add release notes and a press kit to my Command Center Earth webpage. Okay, I'd look at these ACs and I'd say, how many scrum points is this? Okay, maybe it's 3. Okay, now I would be at 8 points. Okay, now I could do 2 more. I'd pull that one in, and then I just keep doing it like this, okay? Over and over and over until I got to 10 points, and then boom, that's my sprint. That's my 2-week long amount of work that I committed to. Then I would sort of do some evaluation. This is when we would do a retrospective, they call it. So I would create a document, which I'll show you guys right now. So you'll see I have all these retrospectives. We were at 17, but I think I messed up and it doesn't coincide. So I think it's 16. Thinking of a way to validate save system or move away from it. So start thinking of a way to validate my save system. So this is something I was like, hey, I need to automate my save system, making sure that the reference IDs are all correct without having to manually do that, because otherwise a save file is going to break and someone's going to get angry at me. So I was just realizing this at the end of the sprint. Optimizing on iOS side seems like they may begin to be more necessary. So I was trying to push off optimization as much as I could, but I was realizing at this point, like, hey, I really need to start optimizing for iOS, because I'm realizing that the performance difference from Android and iOS is a pretty big gap. It was a small fix, actually. I already did that and it's ended up being something silly, but it was nice to reflect and realize like, hey, I really need to start doing this. So I was actually doing 1 week long sprints at one point, which was insane. And I said, hey, 1 week long sprints are brutal. Set up a date when 1 week sprints will end and I'll transition to 2 week sprints. So that was my stop. 4 levels in one sprint seemed pretty, actually this is not for 16. I think it was the 2 before this, but you guys get the gist. 4 levels in one sprint seems pretty damn hard. Let's shoot for 2 and move up 1 if we think that's possible. I was doing 4 levels every time and that was insanely hard. Having to build the iOS version of the game with the MacBook, get Unity Cloud build, working with the build. So bottom line, this is the stop, continue. We're doing release notes. It's pretty clever. Continue that format. So things that I think I did well, implementing more analytics. So bottom line, you just essentially keep doing this, right? So you keep reflecting, you keep committing. So that is essentially how I structure sort of the programming side. The one last thing I'll leave you guys with is just some small things that are really helpful when you start pulling in freelancers or other people that you want to work on your project. So I had somebody doing sound effects. The way I worked with him was very similar. I just said, I created a task for him. So create all menu buttons, button press sound effects. I did something very similar where I said, hey, here are the ACs. And then we just like in ClickUp, I just had this long comment stream where it was like, he wasn't actually using it at one point. So I was just kind of posting what he was telling me. But at one point he did start using it, I think in another task, just because I worked with him on Upwork. And so, so you can kind of see here he's starting to post in, but it made it really, really nice to have sort of this interface between the work that needed to be done and sort of a place where everything lived. Right now I can reference it, I can show it to you guys. And the way I did this in ClickUp was I just created a separate list called audio and sound effects, and then all of my audio and sound effects will live under this sort of list space. I have one for menus, so you'll see I have different statuses here. So open, finalizing requirements, wireframing, visual design, polish, close. So these were when I was creating all of my menus, I would kind of move them in the appropriate status so I knew where they lived. So you could see right now, I'm not really happy with my controls, my post level success and my post level failed. That's still polished. I really need to make them kind of better. But yeah, I think that is really it. So we have the backlog menus, audio and sound effects. And then, like I said, I have my sprints, which I kind of show within here. So I know this video was probably long as hell. I'm super sorry, but hopefully this was insightful. I know, like I said, I don't think a lot of people are talking about this, and I know I did probably a horrible job explaining it, but like I said, I will get better in the future at breaking these things down. This is super raw and really just kind of giving you guys a look inside of how I structure things, and you get to hear me ramble for what seems like 10 minutes. If it's longer, dear God, I'm sorry. That's me, guys. I appreciate you watching the video. If you're curious about the game and after looking at this, the game's called Command Center Earth. It's available for iOS and Android. And hopefully you guys are looking forward to the next devlog.